Could this actually be the end of Uber and Lyft? Honestly, I don't know, but this does bring up a very unique claim with the fact that AI, as we know it's coming at some point, and things like self-driving cars, not only could it revolutionize the ride-sharing industry, of course, but it might be the full end of Lyft and Uber. I'm right now on the Motley Fool, and you can see right here, the rise of autonomous vehicles could create issues for Uber and Lyft in the long run. In a world where there are fully self-driving vehicles or FSD vehicles, Uber and Lyft's largest costs can essentially be eliminated. It doesn't matter what industry a company is in. If its single biggest expense can be taken out of the picture, that can be a huge boon financially. Just imagine what Uber profits would look like in this scenario. Basically, the idea that, as you can imagine, if let's say we had all self-driving cars, Uber and Lyft would not have to hire drivers, which means that would lower their expenses a tremendous amount. And I know for a lot of drivers out there, this is a very scary thought. Could it happen in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? Really, really tough to say at this moment. However, if fully self-driving cars become a reality, there might not even be a need for Uber or Lyft's ride-hailing service anymore, as the software providers working on this technology could simply create their own robo-taxi services. This is like controlling the operating system to a new computing platform. In this scenario, the cars will just become a commodity. This brings up a really interesting point that I'm going to be honest, I've never once thought about. It is very interesting to think, like, could there be a finite end for Uber and Lyft? Now, taking a step back, and I think this is super important for this discussion, I personally, and I've said this before in other videos, I don't really look at Uber and Lyft as ride-sharing apps, although by definition they are. I think at the end of the day, at like the most fundamental level, they're more on-demand apps. If you need something, you have it on demand. And I think Gary Vaynerchuk said, which I loved, is that he goes, look, Uber and Lyft is not really a transportation app in terms of saving you on transportation. It's a time app. I mean, think about it, like you hit a button, it gets right there. It's very convenient, very, very quick, right? Uber and Lyft is amazing and theoretically has revolutionized the world. There's no exaggeration to say that, right? In addition to that, I also look at Uber and Lyft not just as a ride-sharing app, but actually as a matchmaking app, right? You're pairing a driver with a rider. And that connective feature of Uber and Lyft, I think, is what makes it so incredibly smart and intuitive, and how, like I said, it's blown up all over the world. And now if you think about it, most people when going out take an Uber and Lyft, right? Before, when it comes to getting a taxi, it was a very tricky thing. Like in terms of the matchmaking process, so to speak, you have to maybe even call a taxi company, wait outside. You don't know if they're coming or not. You know, you might not even get a call. It's a tricky thing. If, let's say, you're in a place like New York City, a lot of times you just walk around doing this to try to get a taxi. It can be a huge thing. So the matchmaking process, I think back in the day when it came to taxis, was just very, very difficult, right? As opposed to now, when you have Uber and Lyft, the matchmaking in terms of you trying to find an Uber and Lyft is unbelievably easy. Now, bringing that to AI, I know, now I might as well say too, I'm very against AI. I've said that before in other videos, you know, whether you love him or hate him when it comes to Elon Musk, there's some things he says that I heavily disagree with. Some things he says that I agree with. One thing he said that I agree with is that whether you like AI or not, the fundamental fact is we will not control them, right? I'm not trying to get into like a Black Mirror thing, but I'm against AI. When it comes to self-driving cars, there is a lot of controversy about this in terms of like if they're reliable or not. But I think at the end of the day, as technology improves, it is almost inevitable that I can even see it, maybe even being similar to, I think it's Minority Report was the movie, or a bunch of movies like this, where the cars all drive themselves and almost very few humans, or maybe you're not even allowed to drive your car because of the risk of human error, right? I think self-driving cars is almost inevitable. So when it comes to ride sharing, I know, again, a lot of people are worried, well, what's going to happen with me when it comes to me trying to make ends meet as a rideshare driver, as an Uber driver, as a Lyft driver? And I have said in other videos, I still think we're at least like a decade out from that. I could be wrong, right? But I know Google and other companies and Tesla and stuff like this are working on self-driving cars that are fully self-driving, where you get in the car and you don't do anything. And that's been getting a lot better. But when it comes to the ride-sharing world, where you're treating this as a business, I just think we're pretty far away from that. And what's interesting about this article, now going back to it, is I think for a lot of drivers, they're concerned about the replacement. Like, you know, like I mentioned, like they briefly mentioned in the beginning of the article, saying, look, you know, if you think about it, the biggest cost for Uber and Lyft is paying the drivers. If you remove the drivers, well, you're pretty much all set now, right? You don't really need to pay anybody anything. That can get very tricky. And again, like I mentioned before in other videos when I've talked about AI, maybe some people would like that, some people wouldn't. I will say for me, it is kind of nice when I get in Uber or Lyft to have that human connection and talk to somebody, right? So I do, personally, I prefer that and I kind of like that. Some people though, they might not care. They're like, okay, if it's cheaper and I can get from point A to point B, I don't care. So definitely debate. But what this article brings up is a very interesting point. And like I say, things get so big in the future that you have all these self-driving cars. It's pretty simple and easy for something like, or a company like Tesla, for example, just use them as a great example, to create their own app and say, hey, you want a self-driving Tesla to just show up at your house and you want to go down the street, you want to go to the bar, to the club, you want to go to work, you want to go to whatever, you just order on the Tesla app. It's a lot easier, in my opinion, to create an app, and they mentioned this in the article, it's a lot easier to create an app for your own, let's say, car fleet, than create, like I said, the ride-sharing matchmaking aspect. That's a big thing that I think Uber and Lyft has pioneered, which is why it's very difficult to compete with them. Because if you think about it, when it comes to Uber and Lyft, the matchmaking is tricky. You need to have somebody ordering a ride at the same exact time somebody is actually on the road. And that's why I think 90 or 95% of ride-sharing apps have failed, is because those two things need to coincide at the exact same time. I mentioned in other videos about why it's so hard to start a ride-sharing app is compared to, let's say, something like Gatorade. Like, say you want to make your own sports drink, like Logan Paul and KSI made Prime, for example. Well, you can put it on the shelf and it can be bought in a week, a month, maybe 2 months or 3 months later, maybe a year later, right? Depending on the expiration date. That transactional time doesn't have to happen instantaneously. I could put it on the shelf, sit there and wait 3 months, and then someone goes and buys it, boom, 3 months, no big deal, right? When it comes to ride sharing, when someone wants to get an Uber and Lyft, or when someone is working for Uber and Lyft, they have to coincide at the exact same time. And that's what Uber and Lyft has pioneered, is the whole matchmaking aspect when it comes to involving people, and it comes to involving payroll, things like surge pricing. There's all this technical stuff that goes behind the scenes. But when it comes to self-driving cars, once you remove the human element, not only is it going to be way cheaper, of course, we all know that, but then also we're talking about this unique factor of, well, all Tesla has to do, like I said, is make an app, and they just say, hey, hit this button, put down your credit card, we'll do the math out behind the scenes in terms of what we think the ride should cost. And that's it. And especially as self-driving cars become so much more prevalent, if they say they have their own fleet, I mean, does it really, like, it could be that maybe Uber and Lyft start getting drowned out and becoming obsolete because it isn't really that difficult, right? I mean, because if you think about it, Uber and Lyft really pioneers on the fact that they have a lot of drivers constantly in the ecosystem. I could stop filming right now, hit a button, and have an Uber right now. And a lot of people know that. This is why Uber and Lyft is so popular and why it's so hard to create another ride-sharing app. But it is tons of Teslas just roaming the street because I don't need to worry about human people. And I can just hit a button at any time and they'll just show up. Or let's say there's like, I don't know, a parking garage near me with a bunch of Teslas, and I hit a button and one just gets out and drives to me. That is something, I know it's a very Black Mirror-ish style thinking, but that is something that could very, very, very potentially happen. It is tough to say, right? I mean, I don't know. Like I said, I'm against AI, but this is kind of the first interesting point I've seen as to be like, could there be an actual finite end of Uber and Lyft? Could it be that Uber and Lyft are two companies or two apps that only exist for a certain period of time? Personally, I hope not, right? But give it 20 or 30 years,